You'll have to forgive me, good keeper, if my words ramble. My head has been full of ghosts for some years now, though not the kind you can see. You've heard, I suppose, of House Veyro? No? Hi. Once upon a time, we could have bought the whole of this street, this whole quarter of the city, and never felt the purse lighter for it. And now here I am, sitting in your corner with naught but the clothes on my back, paying for my ale with a handful of copper and an old ring I could not bear to part with until this morning. It began, as such downfalls often do, with pride. My father was a hard man, but a clever one. We dealt in grain, timber, and iron, with merchant ships that cut across every sea worth sailing. We owned mills that turned day and night. We had influence in the high court, seats in the guild council, and I was young, handsome, full of confidence, and more than a little convinced that the world had been carved to fit my hand. Her name was Lyrienne, at least that was what she told me. I first saw her at a winter masquerade held at the home of the Baron of Ashford. She was no ordinary guest. She did not flit between conversations, did not laugh too loud at the jests of bored noblemen. She stood near the great marble fireplace, dressed in green velvet so deep it seemed to swallow the firelight, a mask of black lace shadowing her eyes. And she watched. Always she watched. When at last I dared approach her, her voice was, I do not know if there is a word that will serve. It was low, unhurried, with an accent I could not place, as if she had learned our tongue in some far-off land and cared little for perfect polish. She called me my lord, though I had not yet given her my name. And when I asked who she was, she only smiled and said, A friend to your fortune. I thought it a jest. It was not. I tell you this, keeper, because it is important you understand. She was no thief in the ordinary sense. She did not sneak into our vaults or forge our seal on bank letters. No, Lyrienne destroyed us piece by piece, like a patient mason pulling bricks from a wall until it collapses. At first, she became my confidant. I would meet her in quiet gardens, in dim side rooms at parties, and speak to her of matters I told no other, trade contracts, investments, political rivals. She had a way of asking questions that made me believe she was merely curious, but in truth, she was mapping every coin and lever in my family's reach. My father warned me, said she was a schemer. I laughed at him. By spring, she had made herself useful. A whisper here, a suggestion there. Perhaps you should invest in this ship's venture, my lord. I hear the winds will favor them this season. And by the saints, those first ventures always brought profit. She was never wrong. I began to trust her more than my own stewards. And then, the first rot set in. It came in the form of a cargo ship, the Golden Heron. She told me the ship would make double profit in half the expected time, carrying silks from the southern ports. I signed off on the investment at once, but the ship never returned. Some say it was lost to storms. Others whispered pirates. Lyrienne? She said nothing, only watched me with those calm green eyes as I cursed my luck. The loss was large, but not crippling. Yet over the next year, more of her counsel began to turn sour. A warehouse fire in the eastern docks, a sudden tax levied on one of our trade routes, a Correscido partner, El Tunic Aranyunkal. Always she was there when the blow fell, always with that faint, almost sad smile. My father grew ill from the stress. My mother wept over the dinner table. And still I defended Lyrienne, swore she was not to blame. By then she had her claws deep in me, though I was too proud to see it. She came to me at first as a shadow on the periphery of my vision. It was during one of our feasts, a midwinter gathering where the last of our good wine was uncorked, and the boar's head steamed in the candlelight. My guests laughed and toasted, their jewels catching the light as servants poured ale into goblets. Yet behind the merriment, I saw her, standing in the farthest recess of the hall, her hood drawn low over her face. I thought her a beggar, a curiosity that the guards had failed to throw out. But then I saw that the firelight did not touch her, as though the very air bent around her form. When I demanded to know who she was, she stepped forward, her voice low and strangely musical. "I am here to collect what is owed." The room seemed to dim at her words. Conversations faltered. The laughter died. I felt the marrow in my bones tighten with something I could not name. I told her no one in my house owed her anything, that my family paid our debts. She smiled at that. It was not the smile of a common woman. It was too knowing, too slow, the kind of smile that says, "I have already won." "Not you," she said, "your grandfather." I remembered then, a family whisper, almost forgotten, of a time long before I was born, when my grandfather had been gravely ill. It was said a wandering healer had come to him in the night, and by morning he could walk again. The healer had asked no coin. My grandfather had laughed about it to his dying day, saying he must have been saved by God himself. Now I began to wonder if the healer had not been God, but something else entirely. I ordered my steward to escort the woman out. He touched her arm and screamed. His hand blistered as though plunged into boiling water. The other servants shrank back. The witch, for I now knew her to be such, simply turned and walked out into the snow, her footprints vanishing almost as soon as they touched the ground. That night I could not sleep. Dreams came in waves, and in each one I saw my lands shrinking, my house crumbling, my gold spilling into the dirt. And always, at the edge of my vision, she stood, waiting. Within a week, the first loss came. A shipment of spice from the southern ports, worth enough to pay half a year's expenses, was lost when the ship mysteriously caught fire in calm seas. The captain swore he saw a dark shape standing on the waves before the flames began. A month later, 2 of my tenants were found dead in their cottage, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. No cause could be found, but on the hearthstone was a single black feather. By spring, my horses began to die, one by one, their eyes clouded, their bodies stiff as though turned to stone. The more I tried to replace what was lost, the more seemed to vanish. My coin went quickly. My fields grew barren. The merchants I had known for decades began refusing my letters. My name, once a seal of trust, was now met with silence. It was then she came again. I was sitting in my study, surrounded by ledgers that no longer made sense, when the candles guttered and went out. The air grew cold, and from the shadows she stepped forward, her eyes catching what little light remained. "You could have paid the debt," she said. "What debt?" I asked. My voice cracked. "Name your price and be done with it." She looked almost amused. "Do you think it is coin I want?" I told her I would give her gold, land, even my title. Her smile returned, that slow, terrible smile. "Gold is ash in my hands. Land is dust. What I want is older than your name. What I want is deeper than your vaults. Your grandfather promised me a life, and since he is long gone, it must be yours." I felt a coldness spread through me, as if my blood had turned to water. I refused her. Her eyes darkened like storm clouds. "Then I will take it by pieces." She vanished, and with her went the warmth of the room. The next months were a descent into ruin. My sister fell ill, a wasting sickness no physician could cure. My cousins quarreled bitterly, then vanished altogether. Servants fled the house, leaving their wages behind rather than stay another night. I tried to keep my estate running, but each attempt failed. Carts broke, granaries flooded, deals collapsed on the eve of their signing. And then the witch returned a third time. It was summer, and the air was heavy with the scent of dying crops. She came to me in the orchard where I had once played as a child, the apple trees bare and blackened. "One last chance," she said. "Name your terms." She stepped closer, her shadow falling across me though the sun still shone above. "Give me your name, renounce it, and all that comes with it. You will live, poor, wandering, forgotten, but you will live. Refuse, and I will strip you of more than wealth." I could not do it. My name was all I had left. Without it, I was no one. So I refused. She did not argue. She simply reached out and touched the nearest tree. In an instant it withered, splitting down the middle with a sound like a scream. And from that day my ruin was complete. Her name was whispered through the town, though seldom above the breath. Marwyn of the Hollow Vale. A name that slid across the tongue like oil over water. The few who spoke it with confidence either did not understand the weight it carried, or were too far gone to care. She was no beauty in the traditional sense. There was no youthful glow, no golden hair, no symmetrical grace to her features. Yet there was something about her that made the eye linger longer than one intended, as if her presence reached out and wrapped invisible fingers around your mind. Her hair was a deep black that caught no light, her skin pale to the point of seeming thin, almost translucent, like moonlight on milk. When she came to my father's house, she did not knock. The servants claimed they had not opened the door for her. She was simply there, one moment, standing in the main hall, smiling faintly as though she had always belonged. "Lord Halric," she said, inclining her head just so. "I am here to help." And help she did, or so it appeared at first. At the time, our estates had begun to show the faintest cracks in their foundation. The fields that once yielded bushels enough to feed 100 souls for a year were thinning. The grain came up pale, and the roots rotted easily. The wine harvest soured early that autumn, turning to vinegar in the casks. My father, a man of stubborn dignity, would not admit we were in trouble, but I saw the way he lingered over the accounts at night, rubbing his temples, the ledgers whispering ruin in black ink. Marwyn offered solutions that sounded almost insultingly simple. She walked the fields and told the farmers to plant differently, to listen to the soil. She gave the vintners a handful of dried herbs to hang in the cellars to keep the rot away. At first it seemed she was right. The next season the fields grew thick again, almost unnaturally so, their colors too deep, too green. The wine held its sweetness, and the barrels stayed whole. My father began to trust her. Too much. Her payment was always the same. Something personal. Never coin, never jewels. A lock of hair from my mother's head. A ribbon my sister had worn since she was a child. The hilt from my father's sword. Just the hilt, mind you. not the blade. These she kept in a small, battered wooden chest she carried everywhere. I once asked her why she wanted such trifles. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "Because they carry weight. Not the kind you can measure on a scale, boy, but the kind that tips the balance of lives." There was something in her eyes when she said it, something that made the air feel thinner. It was in her 3rd year under our roof that the real unraveling began. It happened so gradually, we almost didn't see it. The first hint came with the cattle. One by one, they began to fall ill, their eyes clouding over, their bodies thin despite constant feeding. Marwyn said it was the land adjusting and gave my father a small vial of black liquid to mix into their water. They died anyway. Then came the debtors, men my father had known for decades, who had always honored their accounts, turning up at our gates demanding coin, swearing he had borrowed from them and never repaid. My father denied it, but they brought records, contracts, and the signatures were his, perfectly his. By the 4th year, the estate was bleeding from every seam. Our crops, once unnaturally abundant, began to wither faster than before she came. The wells grew cloudy. The wine barrels cracked open overnight, spilling their contents like blood onto the cellar floor. My mother grew sick, an illness no physician could name. She would sleep for days, her skin damp, her lips pale as paper. My sister began waking at night, screaming that a woman was sitting in her room, watching her from the shadows. And still, my father defended Marwen. He said she was the only one trying to help us, that without her we would have fallen into ruin years ago. I knew it for a lie. The breaking point came one night in late winter, the kind where the snow clings to the bare trees like bone dust. I woke to a sound in the hallway, a low rhythmic whisper like the rustle of a snake's scales against stone. I crept from my bed and followed it to my father's study. The door was ajar, and through the crack I saw Marwen standing over his desk, that wooden chest open before her. The firelight caught the contents, locks of hair, scraps of ribbon, a tarnished silver ring I recognized as my mother's wedding band. She was speaking to them. Not about them. To them. The language was wrong, bending at angles my mind couldn't follow. The shadows on the walls shifted unnaturally, stretching toward her voice. Then she lifted her head and looked directly at me. Her eyes. They were not human that night. They were black, depthless, like staring into a moonless well. "Go back to bed," she said softly. "It isn't finished yet." The days after the failed harvest were a blur of quiet dread. My family home, once a place where every hall rang with conversation and every corridor smelled faintly of polished oak, had grown cold. Servants left in trickles, taking what wages I could spare until there were none left at all. The hearths stayed unlit, except in my study, where I clung to what warmth I could find in brandy and fading hope. I knew she was still out there, the witch. She never appeared in the same place twice, but her influence hung over everything. The villagers avoided my estate road altogether, as though it had been cursed ground. Even tradesmen who once begged for my patronage now found reasons to sell elsewhere. It was as if my very name had been scratched out of the world's ledger. One evening, as the autumn winds howled across the fields, I heard the faintest knock on the great oak door. Not the insistent thud of a messenger, nor the hurried rap of a beggar, but a slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap. I opened it to find a package sitting in the moonlight, a plain wooden box bound with fraying twine. Inside was a single black feather and a scrap of parchment on which was written in fine, angular script, "Nothing blooms forever." My hands trembled. I slammed the box shut and cast it into the fire, but the flames didn't so much as singe the wood. It lay there unburning, until at last I threw it into the cold night and bolted the door. From that day on, I began hearing voices in the halls, familiar ones at first, my father's tone when he gave me my first riding crop, my mother's gentle hum as she walked the garden, then others, whispers I didn't recognize, carrying words I couldn't quite make out, slipping behind me no matter which way I turned. The accounts dwindled to nothing. My lands, without coin to tend them, became little more than wild scrub. Roof tiles loosened and fell. Rain came in through cracks that once would have been repaired within the hour. And through it all I saw her only once more, at a distance, atop the hill beyond the east field. She stood as still as a gravestone, her shawl whipping in the wind, and though her face was shadowed, I knew she was smiling. My vision swam with rage, and I grabbed my hunting rifle, running down the slope and across the field. But no matter how quickly I moved, the hilltop never seemed to draw nearer. It was as if the earth stretched between us with every step I took. And then, without so much as turning away, she was gone. By winter, I was forced to sell the last of my silverware to pay off a fraction of my debts. My family portraits, 5 generations of proud faces, were carried away by strangers for paltry sums. I did not see them again. The manor, stripped bare of its treasures, seemed to echo with her laughter when I walked its halls. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once, curling around my ears like cold breath. Sleep offered no reprieve. In my dreams, she would sit at the head of my dining table, drinking from my father's chalice, her eyes glinting in the candlelight as the walls cracked and splintered around us. I began to keep the lights burning at all hours, for I knew with the certainty of a dying man, that the darkness belonged to her. It was in the dead of one such night, with snow piled against the shutters, that I realized the truth. She was not trying to kill me. She was trying to make me live long enough to watch everything vanish. The night after I fled my family's manor, I camped in a copse of twisted oaks, too afraid to approach any nearby village. The fire I built was meager. I dared not make it bright for fear she might see its glow. I barely slept, and when I did, dreams of fire and her laughter haunted me. By dawn, I resolved to at least see what had become of the estate. I took the old deer path that wound up toward the ridge overlooking the grounds. The sun was just rising when I crested the hill, and there I saw what no heir should ever see. The great manor of House Vernot was no more than a blackened skeleton. Smoke still curled from the ruins, though no flame remained. The proud marble columns lay shattered, the stained glass windows melted into warped puddles of color in the dirt. But what froze me in place was her. She stood in the center of the courtyard, barefoot, her long hair loose and wild, wearing a gown blacker than soot. Her hands were raised to the morning sky as though receiving some invisible blessing. Around her feet, in a perfect circle, the earth had gone pale. No grass, no soil, just powder, as if the very ground had been turned to ash. I crouched behind a boulder and watched, barely daring to breathe. I couldn't hear her words, but I saw her mouth move, the shapes of the syllables strange and uneven. Then she bent to the ground and scooped some of that pale ash into a leather pouch tied at her waist. She tied it shut and began to walk toward the tree line. In the half-light, I could swear she moved with no more weight than a shadow. One blink, and she was gone. I crept closer to the ruins. The smell, gods, it was worse than death. Sweet, cloying, as though someone had burned sugar and flowers and flesh all at once. The well where my father once drew water had collapsed inward. The old fountain where I played as a boy was filled with stagnant black water. Inside the manor I found little intact. A scorched frame here, a twisted goblet there. My father's study was nothing but cinders. But in the library, one thing remained untouched. It was a book, not one of our ledgers nor one of my mother's treasured romances. This book was bound in cracked leather, and when I opened it, the ink on the pages was the color of dried blood. The script was in a language I had never seen before, jagged and curling, as though the letters themselves were alive. And there, pressed between the pages, was a lock of hair, black. Her hair. I dropped it as though it burned. It fell open to a page where the only thing written, in that same red ink, was my family's name. I stumbled out of the ruins, my breath ragged, and did not look back. I left the ridge, the valley, the lands that had been ours for 5 generations. For years now I have wandered from town to town, tavern to tavern. My name is Mud, my coin is scarce. People say I am cursed, and perhaps they are right. Every so often I hear rumors, a wealthy merchant in some far-off city who died suddenly after hiring a new housekeeper, or a minor lord whose entire storehouse rotted away in weeks. Each tale has a constant, a dark-haired woman with a calm smile. I do not chase these rumors anymore. You ask why I tell you this, tavern keeper, because I think, no, I know, she is still walking the roads, and should you ever meet her, you will know her by the way she says your name, as if she has known it for centuries. And when she smiles, gods help you.